ICE enforcement data reveals shocking patterns that most people never see. Some immigrant communities face deportation at rates 10 times higher than others. Detention lengths vary wildly by nationality, and approval rates for immigration relief differ dramatically based on where you're from. The statistics tell a story that's both complex and eye-opening. Let me show you what the data actually reveals. Welcome back to Immigration Fresh Updates, where we bring you immigration facts, not fear. Today's video tackles one of the most controversial questions in U.S. immigration. Does ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, treat different nationalities differently? This isn't about politics or opinions. This is about data, patterns, and documented enforcement statistics. What we found might surprise you. Some countries' citizens face dramatically higher deportation rates, longer detention periods, and lower approval rates for relief from removal. Others experience relatively smooth interactions with ICE. In this video, I'm breaking down the actual enforcement data and revealing the 7 key factors that explain these disparities: diplomatic relationships, crime statistics, visa overstay rates, cooperation agreements, and more. The truth is more complex than simple accusations. Let's examine the facts. Number 7. Countries with higher visa overstay rates face more ICE scrutiny. Let's start with one of the most data-driven factors: visa overstay rates. ICE prioritizes enforcement based on which countries have the highest rates of visitors who overstay their visas and remain in the U.S. illegally. The Department of Homeland Security publishes annual overstay reports showing which countries have the highest percentages of visitors who don't leave when their visas expire. Countries with overstay rates above 10% face significantly more ICE scrutiny of their nationals who are in the U.S. Here's what the data shows. Countries with low overstay rates, under 2%, like most Western European nations, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and Australia, see their citizens facing minimal ICE enforcement action. When citizens from these countries are encountered by ICE, they're more likely to receive voluntary departure or have cases administratively closed. Conversely, countries with high overstay rates, above 10%, certain African nations, some Central American countries, and select Asian nations, face disproportionate ICE enforcement attention. ICE targets these communities for compliance investigations and removal proceedings at higher rates. Why? Because overstay rates are used as predictive indicators. If country X has a 15% overstay rate, ICE assumes that nationals from country X currently in the U.S. are statistically more likely to be out of status, which triggers enforcement. Is this racist? The government argues it's data-driven risk assessment. Critics argue it creates discriminatory enforcement patterns that disproportionately target certain nationalities. The reality: overstay statistics directly impact which communities ICE prioritizes, creating measurable disparities in enforcement. Number 6. Countries that cooperate with deportations face different treatment. This factor reveals a stark truth. ICE treats nationals from countries that cooperate with deportations very differently from countries that resist or slow-walk repatriation. The U.S. has repatriation agreements with most countries, requiring them to accept their deported citizens. But compliance varies dramatically. Some countries issue travel documents within days, others delay for months or years. Countries with full cooperation: Mexico, Canada, most European nations, Philippines, India, and many others issue travel documents quickly and accept deportees without resistance. ICE processes removal cases from these countries smoothly, and detention times are typically shorter because deportation can be executed rapidly. Countries with slow or resistant cooperation. Certain countries, Cuba historically, some African nations, select Asian countries, delay issuing travel documents, dispute citizenship claims, or create bureaucratic obstacles. As a result, nationals from these countries spend far longer in ICE detention, sometimes years, awaiting deportation that can't be executed without travel documents. Here's the paradox. Nationals from non-cooperative countries actually face harsher treatment, longer detention, even though their governments are trying to protect them. Meanwhile, nationals from cooperative countries are deported faster, but spend less time detained. ICE's position. We don't control how long people are detained. The home country's cooperation determines detention length. Critics' response. This creates nationality-based disparities in detention conditions and lengths that effectively punish individuals for their government's policy. The data shows clear patterns. Your country of origin's diplomatic cooperation directly impacts your ICE detention experience. Number 5. Criminal conviction rates among different immigrant communities. This is controversial, but the data is public. ICE prioritizes enforcement against nationals from countries whose immigrant populations in the U.S. show higher rates of certain criminal convictions. ICE publishes data on criminal convictions among detained and removed individuals, broken down by nationality. This data shows significant variance. Some nationality groups show criminal conviction rates, for detained individuals, of 5 to 10%, while others show rates of 40 to 60%. Countries whose U.S. immigrant populations have lower crime rates, Canada, most European nations, Japan, South Korea, India, China, Philippines, see their nationals facing ICE enforcement primarily only when they've violated immigration law. Criminal ICE encounters are rare. Countries whose U.S. immigrant populations show higher rates of certain convictions, particularly gang-related activity, drug trafficking, or violent crime, see their nationals facing heightened ICE scrutiny, even for minor immigration violations. ICE's enforcement priorities explicitly target public safety threats, which the agency defines based on criminal history. This policy disproportionately impacts certain nationality groups based on crime statistics. Is this racist? The government argues it's public safety-driven enforcement based on objective criminal conviction data. Critics argue these statistics reflect broader socioeconomic factors, discriminatory policing, and that using them to target entire nationality groups is inherently biased. The uncomfortable truth. Crime statistics by nationality do exist. ICE does use them in enforcement prioritization, and this creates measurable disparities in which communities face aggressive enforcement. The data is complex and controversial, but it's a documented factor in differential ICE treatment. Number 4. Proximity to U.S. borders creates enforcement disparities. Geography plays a massive role in ICE enforcement patterns, creating dramatic disparities based purely on where your country is located relative to the United States. The statistics are stark. Over 90% of ICE deportations are to Mexico, Central American countries, and Caribbean nations. Not because these countries represent 90% of undocumented immigrants, but because of geographic proximity to the U.S. border. Why proximity matters. Countries sharing land borders with the U.S., Mexico, Canada, or located nearby, Central America, Caribbean, face exponentially higher ICE enforcement because 1. Border apprehensions. Most ICE arrests happen near borders, disproportionately affecting nearby countries' nationals. 2. Deportation logistics. It's cheaper and faster to deport someone to Mexico than to Bangladesh, so ICE prioritizes geographically close deportations. 3. Repeat crossings. Proximity makes unauthorized re-entry easier, leading to repeat ICE encounters with the same individuals. Meanwhile, undocumented immigrants from distant countries, Asia, Africa, Europe, Middle East, face far lower ICE enforcement rates. Why? Because they typically entered legally and overstayed visas, away from border enforcement zones, and deporting them is logistically complex and expensive. The data. A Mexican national and an Irish national with identical immigration violations face vastly different ICE enforcement likelihood purely due to geography. Is this racist? No, it's geographic. But it creates nationality-based disparities that feel discriminatory to impacted communities. The result? Latin American and Caribbean nationals face disproportionate ICE enforcement due to geography, not necessarily policy targeting. Number 3. Socioeconomic status and visa types create different ICE treatment. Here's an uncomfortable truth. ICE treats wealthy, educated immigrants from developed countries very differently from poor, less educated immigrants from developing countries, and visa class is the mechanism. The pattern: immigrants from wealthy countries, Western Europe, Canada, Australia, Japan, Singapore, typically enter the U.S. on high-status visas, student visas for prestigious universities, H-1B skilled worker visas, L-1 executive transfers, investor visas. Even when they violate status, ICE rarely prioritizes enforcement against them. Immigrants from poorer countries often enter on lower status visas, tourist visas, which they overstay, temporary work visas, or cross borders without authorization. ICE aggressively enforces against these populations. Why the disparity? Several factors. 1. Resources. Wealthy immigrants hire attorneys, post bond, and fight deportation effectively. ICE faces less resistance with poor immigrants who can't afford legal representation. 2. Employer support. High-skilled visa holders have corporate legal teams defending them. Low-wage workers are abandoned by employers. 3. Political pressure. Deporting a European investment banker creates political backlash. Deporting a Central American laborer doesn't. 4. Detection methods. ICE workplace raids target low-wage industries, agriculture, construction, food service, where developing country immigrants work, not white-collar offices where developed country immigrants work. The data shows socioeconomic status, which correlates strongly with country of origin, dramatically impacts ICE enforcement likelihood. Is this racist? It's more accurately classist, but since class and nationality correlate heavily in immigration, it creates racial and national origin disparities. The reality: wealthy country immigrants face gentler ICE treatment than poor country immigrants. Number 2. Diplomatic alliances determine who gets protected from deportation. This factor reveals the starkest truth. U.S. foreign policy directly determines which nationalities receive protection from ICE and which don't. Temporary Protected Status, TPS, Deferred Enforced Departure, DED, and similar programs protect nationals from certain countries from deportation. But these designations are politically driven, not needs-driven. Countries whose nationals currently or recently received protection. Venezuela, political ally against Maduro. Ukraine, war victims, U.S. ally. Haiti, humanitarian crisis, political considerations. Afghanistan, U.S. military involvement. Some African nations, humanitarian grounds. Countries whose nationals don't receive protection despite similar or worse conditions. Many African countries with civil wars, Middle Eastern countries with conflict, Asian countries with persecution. The pattern: countries with strategic U.S. interests or strong political lobbying receive TPS/DED, protecting their nationals from ICE. Countries without strategic value or political advocacy face full ICE enforcement. Example: Venezuelans in the U.S. have TPS protection from deportation. Guatemalans and Hondurans, facing similar gang violence and political instability, don't. Why? U.S. foreign policy priorities, not objective humanitarian comparison. ICE doesn't set these policies, but they execute them, creating massive nationality-based disparities in who's protected and who's deported. Is this racist? It's geopolitically driven, but it creates discriminatory outcomes where nationality determines protection regardless of individual circumstances. The uncomfortable reality. Your country's relationship with the U.S. government determines whether ICE can deport you, independent of your personal situation. Number 1. Documented evidence of targeting based on appearance and ethnicity. And here's number 1, the most direct factor. Documented evidence that ICE enforcement includes elements of racial and ethnic profiling. Court cases, investigative reports, and ICE's own data reveal patterns of enforcement based on appearance, language, and ethnicity. 1. Workplace raids. ICE targets workplaces in Latino-heavy industries, meatpacking, agriculture, construction, while largely ignoring industries with Asian or European overstayers, tech, hospitality, academia. 2. Community sweeps. ICE conducts enforcement operations in predominantly Latino neighborhoods, while rarely conducting similar operations in communities with Asian, African, or European overstayers. 3. Transportation checks. ICE conducts immigration checks on buses and trains in border states, disproportionately questioning Latino passengers based on appearance. 4. Wrongful detentions. Citizens and legal residents who look Latino have been wrongfully detained by ICE at far higher rates than those who appear European or Asian. The data. While ICE doesn't officially admit racial profiling, enforcement statistics show Latino immigrants face ICE encounters at rates far exceeding their proportion of the undocumented population, while Asian, European, and African overstayers, who collectively make up millions of undocumented immigrants, face minimal enforcement. Legal challenges. Multiple lawsuits have alleged racial profiling in ICE operations, with some resulting in settlements and policy changes. Is this racist? The evidence suggests enforcement patterns that disproportionately target Latino communities exist, whether through explicit policy or implicit bias in operational decisions. The uncomfortable conclusion. While not all ICE actions are racially motivated, documented patterns show nationality, ethnicity, and race do impact enforcement in measurable ways. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think? Is ICE enforcement driven by legitimate factors, or does bias play a role? Share your perspective respectfully in the comments below. So there you have it. 7 factors that explain why ICE treats different nationalities differently. The answer isn't simple. Some disparities result from data-driven enforcement decisions, diplomatic realities, and geographic factors. Others reveal uncomfortable patterns of bias, profiling, and discriminatory outcomes. The truth is complex. ICE enforcement reflects both legitimate priorities and problematic patterns. If this video gave you a more nuanced understanding, please hit that like button, subscribe to Immigration Fresh updates, and share your thoughts respectfully below. Which factor surprised you most? Let me know. Stay informed, stay critical, stay engaged.